Semiconductor earnings begin this week when we hear from Taiwan Semi and ASML. Those will be very important reports as it relates to the industry. Nvidia announced major manufacturing coming back here to the United States. We'll discuss comments made by President Trump earlier today as it relates to automobile makers and other tariffs that could potentially apply to the semiconductor industry, how this impacts things going forward. We'll talk about Advanced Micro Devices, which reports their earnings just a couple of weeks from now. We'll discuss some of the important events that has happened since we last joined you. We'll also discuss Intel as it's seen its shares rise today on a report that they made a majority stake sale of their Altera business for a massive loss. And we'll look at these stocks technically, we'll look at the ETFs, and we'll see if there's any buying opportunities as it relates to the semiconductor industry. What is going on, investors? Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. Obviously, things are very fluid, not only in the tariff world, but also in as it relates to semiconductors, because both countries at the heart of the tariff negotiations, or the tariff war, if you want to say, is both China and the United States. And semiconductors is kind of at the center of it, but both countries realize that neither country can fall behind as it relates to that, because it puts you at a massive disadvantage, not only from a society kind of intelligence and technology perspective, but likely from a national defense perspective as well. We'll kick things off with Nvidia, which has seen its shares rise by about 22% over the past year. Year to date, though, things have slid down by about 17.5%. So the first thing that you want to keep in mind, when the big daddy of the industry is down 17.5%, if you own smaller cap companies, if you own suppliers to Nvidia, their stocks are likely going to be down 30, 40, 50% or more. That is just how the semiconductor industry works. If you're comfortable with it, it's a great industry to make some money. It's also a great industry to buy the dips, because when the dips come, as you've seen, they're very, very steep and they're very hard and very fast, as we've seen on the stock charts. We'll review those in a minute. But very interesting comments as it relates to President Trump on these tariffs. He was speaking in the White House earlier as an unrelated event. He had a president, I think, of another country there. And one of the things that he said is the higher the tariff, the faster they come. And what he's referring to is manufacturing from those industries coming back to the United States. Now, everybody watching this can understand that if you're trying to build cars or semiconductors or cell phones or whatever it is, you can't just slap a large tariff on and then all of a sudden snap your fingers and then have manufacturing here in the United States. And obviously, some people were concerned maybe the president doesn't understand this. I think he does. And what's interesting is there was a follow-up comment about Trump that may not get a ton of press, but he says, look, I'm a flexible person. This is relates to tariffs. I don't change my mind, meaning he's not going to change his mind on tariff, but he could be flexible. And this comment was related to the automobile industry, that you have a 25% tariff on automobiles and automobile parts coming in and out of Canada and Mexico. And the way the United States is set up is a lot of car companies bring in parts from Canada and particularly Mexico. And sometimes these parts go back and forth. And then finally they come into the United States, they get dropped in like an engine or something like that here in America, or the part or the car is made in Mexico, one of the two. And now you're suffering a 25% tariff there. Well, the automobile companies, they might be interested in bringing the manufacturing here in the United States, but they understand that that is going to take months, years, potentially. And so President Trump says he's looking at something to give automobile companies flexibility, time to adjust to the supply chains. And so while the president didn't mention anything specific, I think what this could potentially mean is the tariffs are quote unquote in place. But if you are making adjustments, you are committed to bring the supply chains, and I'm just speculating here. It's hard to speculate what the president is going to do on a day by day, let alone hour by hour basis. But it potentially, what I could see happening, since based on his comments that he said in the Oval Office today or in the White House today, is that maybe if you're an automobile company, and we'll get to Nvidia here in a minute as it relates to semiconductors, if you're willing to make a commitment to bring the manufacturing and you start to make progress there, well, maybe the tariffs are reduced or they are put off, or there's, they constantly get delayed while you're making that progress. If the White House is able to communicate that, if that is the policy, then it probably is incredibly bullish for the companies that can afford and manage to bring manufacturing back here to the United States. Now, speaking of that, Nvidia ticked up earlier today, although shares are sliding. I am recording this intraday, so who knows where these things will finish the day. But they say that they are going to manufacture and test chips here in the United States using a gigantic facility in Arizona, combined and in partnership in some ways with Taiwan Semiconductor. Also, another company as it relates to packaging, because you have to make the actual computer chip and then it has to get packaged onto the die and all the components have to get kind of tied together. There were a company called AMD Technology and others to do this here in the United States in Arizona. I think the number thrown out by Nvidia earlier today is they're looking to bring about $500 billion worth of manufacturing back here to the United States. That would be over a 4-year time frame. Obviously, something like this takes a little while to ramp up. Mass production at both plants expected to ramp up in the next 12 to 15 months. So that is why I brought up President Trump's quotes as it relates to the automobile industry, because if the automobile industry can work something out with the president where they're like, hey, we're trying to move manufacturing here to the United States, it might take them 12 to 15 months, 18 months, whatever it is. Well, maybe they can work out something on the tariff wise, set the groundwork for that, and then a company like Nvidia, maybe Apple, others work something out with the president as it relates to these tariffs, bring back manufacturing here in the United States, as that seems to be the goal with these higher tariffs. It's quite possible if these companies can show that they're making progress as it relates to manufacturing those things here in the United States, maybe those tariffs are reduced or delayed as they are making progress. Now, potentially good news for Nvidia as the White House stepped back from potential curbs on Nvidia's H20 chips. The H20 chips are a special graphic processing unit that is sold strictly or almost exclusively to the country of China, as there are export controls on the highest end chips. But Nvidia makes chips that are export compliant and then are allowed to send into China. There were constant changes to this under the President Biden administration where you constantly had them ratcheted up. And so you had these kind of massive orders come in with Nvidia as it relates to these H20 chips. Now, what we know or what we speculate is Nvidia's highest end chips are still likely making their way into China through other regions, particularly probably Malaysia. So whether these things get banned or not probably doesn't have a huge impact on China's access to them. It's just they have to go through other means. Now, really interesting news that relates to China. Obviously, China's not sitting back and just taking this on the chin. They're also retaliating, or I think maybe a better word is responding to this. And they are going to exempt United States semiconductor companies that outsource their manufacturing, which is basically every semiconductor company outside of the great company of Intel, which we'll talk about here in a minute, as their CEO and the company made news earlier this week. Semiconductor companies, as you know, use the great Taiwan Semiconductor to manufacture a lot of their chips, and China obviously has Taiwan, as they believe is more or less part of their country or their territory, so they obviously don't want to punish the great country of Taiwan. So essentially, AMD, Nvidia, Qualcomm, all these companies that outsource their manufacturing into Taiwan, they will likely be exempt from U.S., or in this case, China tariffs that are applied to United States-based semiconductors that are manufactured here in the United States. That impacts Texas Instruments, Intel, and a handful of others. Also, as it relates to the United States tariffs on semiconductors, it's potential that they come in through lower tariff nations, particularly Mexico is looking like a hub where a lot of these semiconductors, when they make their way into data centers, they make their way into the country of Mexico, and then from Mexico find their way into the United States. So theoretically, a chip could be made in Taiwan. It could be packaged in China. That could be sent to Malaysia or then to Mexico and then make its way into the United States and kind of dance its way around these tariffs. Obviously, this is a completely fluid situation, but these companies, as it relates to all business, is very creative in finding solutions, and it'll be interesting to see how this unfolds. Now, breaking before I just started recording, you have many Republican senators that are calling on the Trump administration to get rid of the AI diffusion rule. Now, the rule essentially puts countries into different tiers. So you have tier one countries like in North America and Europe and quote unquote friendly nations with the United States. They get access to any Nvidia chip that they possibly want, including the latest Blackwell designs. Then you'll have tier two countries that for whatever reason, they're viewed as a second-class citizen, and they might be able to get access to maybe potentially these H20s or dumbed-down chips, if you will. And then finally, you have tier three nations. These have a complete ban on getting any types of AI chips. It obviously includes countries like Russia, maybe a few countries in the Middle East, and then potentially China as well. There is a concern within the semiconductor industry that if you alienate China too much, you put China too much on an island, what they are going to do, and I believe this to be true, is that they'll reverse engineer basically everything that Nvidia does. In fact, they're already attempting to do this, and I think to some level of success, and that eventually they'll catch up to Nvidia and potentially TSM or maybe even ASML in terms of capabilities. And now all of a sudden, the United States that has a gigantic lead in terms of semiconductor design, and in some cases in the future, potentially semiconductor manufacturing in Arizona or Ohio or wherever they decide to do it. Well, if you all of a sudden let China copy and iterate and force them to do things on their own, well, then all of a sudden your semiconductor business here in the United States has just created a gigantic brand new competitor. And now it could potentially lessen the need and lessen the desirability for semiconductors here in the United States. Because if China starts pumping out semiconductors that are on par or even better than Nvidia, well, guess what? You have countries all around the world which would love to get their hands on them and potentially at much lower prices. And so the senators calling on President Trump to get rid of that AI diffusion rule, maybe potentially open up the market for these chips being exported even into these nations that we view as potentially unfriendly here in the United States. And we'll see what happens. It's a complicated situation. I tell you what, we've just launched Equity Empire, and early bird subscribers, I'll have a link down below. Early bird subscribers get access to not only the blue chip coverage, which will cover a lot of the semiconductor stocks, but also stocks like McDonald's, Chipotle, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Got over about 60 to 70 stocks that you'll get regular research on, particularly when they report earnings. But early bird subscribers get access to our small cap service, and we have a small cap pick right now that is in the semiconductor space. Its technology is going to go on the next generation Nvidia chips. Its technology is going to make its way onto AMD chips. Its technology is going to make its way onto Broadcom chips. Its technology is the next generation. It's going to make these chips faster. It's going to make them more efficient, which all these companies agree needs to happen. In just a year or two, this company is going to see its technology inside of the data center. In fact, a major company, a Magnificent Seven company, in fact, has just made an investment in this company, and we believe this marks one of the best opportunities in the small cap space. And like I said at the jump, with Nvidia down 17%, shares of a lot of these smaller companies are down 30, 40, 50% in the semiconductor space. But the trends, as you can see, and I think as these companies report earnings, are going to show that the semiconductor industry is not only strong, but the demand is likely continuing to accelerate. So when Nvidia starts to bounce back, and we'll talk about Taiwan Semi and AMD and Intel, when these stocks start to climb again, well, guess what's going to climb even faster? It's going to be these small cap stocks. And again, early bird subscribers get access, exclusive access to our small cap service, all at one low price. I'll have links down below. You're definitely going to want to check that out. We already have huge interest in that. I'm in the process of emailing everybody that has subscribed to send them a thank you for joining us on this. And I think we are going to make people a lot of money, and we're going to have a lot of fun. And so please consider subscribing to Equity Empire. Again, links down below. Now, Taiwan Semiconductor, they report their earnings on April 17th, just a couple of days from now. But as you probably know, when this company reports earnings, it's somewhat anticlimactic. That is because the company reports their earnings or their revenues basically on a quarterly basis. So by the time that they report their earnings, you pretty much already know the first quarter revenue number. You know the growth rate, which was up 41% compared to last year. And this is why I'm so confident in the semiconductor industry. Yes, the big giants are seeing their stocks sell off. It's just kind of a natural thing, ebbs and flows in the markets. Smaller cap companies are going to be off even bigger than this. But the way you measure demand in the semiconductor business is you just have to go to the company that is manufacturing all of their chips. If Taiwan Semiconductor sales were falling off the map, I don't even know if I would be doing this show, but I would definitely be telling everybody, get out of semiconductors. The cyclical rotation is over. The demand is starting to wane because the major manufacturing is seeing its revenues fall off a cliff. That is not what's happening. In fact, it's just the opposite, up 41.6%. The number that you look for when Taiwan Semiconductor reports their earnings, they obviously tend to give quarterly guidance for the upcoming quarter. That will probably be good. These orders that these companies make with Taiwan Semi, not everybody knows this, but Nvidia locks up capacity for like a year, maybe even longer in advance with Taiwan Semi. So it doesn't matter what's happening with tariffs. Doesn't really matter what's happening in the global economy. Nvidia's already locked up space inside of Taiwan Semiconductor's manufacturing facilities to make chips. And so those chips are going to get made no matter what the tariff situation or what's going on in the global economy. And so TSM's revenues should be relatively steady. That's also why it's difficult to judge like when the shift in the semiconductor business is. You have to kind of really tie the whole industry together. But right now, things are looking great. I would expect the upcoming quarterly guidance for TSM to be relatively good. You also get a CapEx number as well. They'll also likely talk about the United States business, as this company obviously is doing, in my opinion, a fantastic job, not only making chips in Taiwan, but they're doing a fantastic job bringing that to like going across an ocean and making chips here in the United States. Not an easy feat, and this company actually makes it look relatively easy. Moving on to AMD, with Nvidia down 17%, you'd actually expect AMD to be down more, and that is the case. Shares are down by about 22% year to date. Over the past year, even worse story, as you're seeing shares of AMD down 40%. Is it creating a good buying opportunity as you now have a valuation just under or right around $150 billion? Now, when the company reports their earnings on May 6th, one thing that I'm anticipating is the current quarter to be actually relatively good, potentially even the guidance for the upcoming quarter to be relatively good as well. It'll be interesting to see Lisa Su's commentary on the conference call if she tries to talk down the expectations for maybe potentially the rest of the year. That is because what we are seeing here in consumers and probably businesses as well is there is a front running, if you will, of these tariffs, as you had first quarter PC shipments surge ahead of tariff announcements. I've also heard a lot of people say, well, I bought an iPhone or I went out and bought a car because of these tariffs things. So these tariffs in some countries, and we have a lot of people watching us around the world here on the channel, in some countries, and you have to understand this about the American consumer, it is a very special thing. In many countries, in fact, almost every country, you start to have tariffs, taxes, all this type of stuff. The consumer hunkers down. They say, oh man, we're going into a trade war with China, and boy, that might impact my job, that might impact my income, it might make goods more expensive, might make goods not as available. In some countries, you hunker down. In America, people are absolutely bonkers out here. It means, oh, well, the iPhone, I have a perfectly working iPhone now, but man, if it goes up to $2,000, I sure would want the one that is for sale now for $1,100. So what does the American consumer do? They go out and buy the brand new iPhone. I have a perfectly working laptop, but my gosh, if the tariffs get put into place and laptops are more expensive, well, then I better buy one now. Same thing with automobiles. It's across the board. That is why it'll be really interesting, particularly these companies with American exposure, particularly these products that are exposed to these tariffs. And it's really well known that potentially the price is going up. You are going to have shipments and demand really surge ahead of those tariff announcements. That'll benefit AMD in the current quarter. probably benefit them in the upcoming quarter as well. Now, if the tariffs get rolled back or they're not as bad, or they can work, or they can send those PCs to Mexico and they make their way in the United States, well, then all of a sudden you've kind of averted all these things. But one thing you have done is you've probably pulled some demand forward. So it'll be interesting to see how the executives kind of explain that on the conference call. Now, as it relates to AMD, one thing that I used to do a lot with Nvidia's business, this was before they were big in the data center and really before the AI industry really took off for them, is the way you would judge Nvidia demand is you would follow all these PC gamers and you would follow video game YouTube channels, video game blogs, and hear what they had to say about Nvidia's products. That is because aside from like crypto mining and some other kind of trends that would pop up, particularly Nvidia's demand came from high-end gamers, people that wanted the best performance of their graphics. Now, their business is completely transformed, but as it relates to AMD, I believe they're kind of picking up some of that business. It's really interesting. And where Nvidia's eye might be off the ball of the gaming market, from my understanding, again, I'm not a professional gamer, and maybe I'm reading these things wrong, but they worked in the past with Nvidia. I think they'll probably apply to AMD. Their series of graphics cards seem very well received. I saw lines out the door. This as it relates to a release of their products essentially last month. And so you have gaming enthusiasts very excited about this company. And now obviously as it relates to Nvidia, $3 trillion company, the gaming enthusiast just is not going to move the needle for a company of that size. But when we're talking about Advanced Micro Devices, $150 billion company, you've got PC shipments potentially surging. That's good for AMD. And then you have enthusiasts very excited about their series of graphics cards. That's also probably good for AMD. Now, they also completed a $5 billion acquisition for ZT Systems. They work with data centers to essentially kind of get their data center up and running. There is a manufacturing part of this business that AMD is looking to potentially find a strategic partner to essentially sell that to. So this $4.9 billion probably be reduced maybe by a little bit because they'll sell off the manufacturing business of that company. Moving over to Intel, it's seen its shares down 44% over the past year, but year to date, one of the bright spots in the semiconductor industry with shares up by about 1.2%. They agreed to sell a majority stake of their Altera business unit to Silver Lake. Now, many years ago, or maybe I think it was maybe under the Pat Gelsinger era, I'm not exactly sure, but they bought this Altera business, and I'm using a figure off the top of my head. Sorry, I meant to check this before we hit record there, but Altera, I think, was purchased for about $17 billion. The transaction, which has Intel selling a 51% or a controlling stake to Silver Lake, which is essentially a technology investment firm. They're selling a controlling stake of 51% at a valuation of $8.75 billion. So that's a pretty big hit there. It probably put a couple $2 billion on Intel's balance sheet, which would probably be good for the company given the financials are still an absolute mess. Now, the new CEO, Mr. Lip-Bu Tan, has a latest controversy, something that he'll have to respond to probably over the next couple of weeks. But according to investigations by Reuters, he has control of more than 40 Chinese companies and funds with minority stakes in over 600 investments, including some with ties to the Chinese military. Obviously, here in the United States, if you're looking for an American type semiconductor company that is not only designing those chips here in America, but also as it relates to Intel, manufacturing those here in the United States. They have manufacturing facilities all over the world. But the big selling point for Intel is they're making them here in the United States. Do you want a CEO with these types of investments and potentially military ties to China? He will need to try to respond to this. Haven't seen anything more recently, although didn't impact shares today as I'm seeing Intel up by about 3%. Now, let's go through these things technically. The SOXX ETF has completely broken down. Talked about it in the past, how you were in this wedge formation, and with these wedges, you tend to break up or down. And unfortunately, including for me, this one broke down. And so that wedge has resolved itself. Now, the good news is When you break down, you tend to find areas of support. You blew through a support area here at 187 or 178, excuse me. You've kind of retested that area. The purple line that I have on this, I'll stretch it out to a weekly view so you get a little bit better view of that. The purple line is what I call the long-term trend line. And so you actually came back. You didn't do a full test on this. If you want to adjust this line, I don't like to move lines to fit my narrative, but you more or less or almost tested this. This is obviously during kind of the depths of the tariff negotiations and the start of the tariff war, I guess we could say. But this trend is still intact, and this is an uptrend. You have a series of higher highs, and you now have a new, I would call this a confirmed, at least on a weekly chart, a confirmed lower low here. So this is a great area if the semiconductor industry continues to bounce back. And obviously we saw with Taiwan Semiconductor, and I think we'll see later this week, Taiwan Semi ASML will report. My guess is ASML will really benefit from this shift to manufacturing back here in the United States. This is obviously a European company, but they make some of the components that actually go into those large lithography machines actually here in California, let alone other parts of the world and the United States. Now, the SMH looking almost identically technically, made a new higher high. Looks like we've confirmed a new lower low, actually hit an area of support, which made a lot of sense right here about 164. In fact, it front ran it a little bit and bounced back to very nicely. This one's really just sitting in the middle of the uptrend. So despite all of the kind of panic and all this stuff that I've seen across social media and across investors and certainly in my inbox and those types of things, people, especially retail investors, very much panicking. These technical charts are still very much intact. There is actually nothing at all unnormal about these technical charts. What you would not want to see is a break lower from this trend. Then you have to start picking areas much lower. But right now, we're not seeing that. Also, speaking of technicals, absolutely holding firm is with Nvidia. You have an area down here at about 85, 88 bucks. In fact, at the start of the week last week, Nvidia was down here at 88 bucks and then ended the week or closed the week up 25% to 110 bucks. We are now, and those areas have held for over a year on Nvidia. Believe it or not, we're basically at the same price almost to the day on Nvidia over the past year. So shares, yes, they've traded up to 155. They've traded as low as about 85 bucks per share, but we are sitting in the middle of sideways consolidation, which is perfectly normal technically. When you start to go sideways as a stock, when you sit in the middle, it's actually pretty darn normal, believe it or not. With AMD, slightly different situation. There is a long-term trend, which is it's flattening out, but I think you could argue that it's still intact, but you have gone sideways with AMD for a while. You have support, pretty firm support down here at about $75 per share. In fact, if you wanted to buy AMD, if it starts retesting these $75 areas, I'd have a stop loss. At the real aggressive area down here at like 50, you wouldn't want to see it get below that. That'd be a disaster. But shoot, you could drop it here at 69 bucks, risk $6 to the downside with the idea, well, hey, PC shipments, graphics cards, company has a nice AI product as well. You could potentially come back up here and retest these highs back up here, 121.30. We've done a lot of damage to the stock. Now, understand with AMD, it's a little bit of a catching a falling knife because since March of last year, you've been making a very steep series of lower highs, lower lows. The prudent investor would wait for a new higher high. Some would argue that's potentially that candle, but you'd like for a push back up to 116. You close above 116, a pullback starting probably at 101. Would signal a buying opportunity. Didn't talk about Broadcom today. They're a relatively quiet company as it relates to making news. Google did report that they have their brand new Tensor Processing Unit 7 that is already inside of data centers. My guess is Broadcom's a big part of that. They're still well above trend with Broadcom. That is because their business also, like Nvidia's, has been transformed, but more or less very much on trend. Yes, it's off the highs of, was that 250 or so, but very much holding track. Now, finally, Intel continues to hold this level, test this level at 19. You wouldn't really want to see it get meaningfully below that. Not exactly sure what the company would have to do to get meaningfully below that. Things are pretty bad, and the valuations are relatively low. You won't hear from Intel until April 24th, really only just 10 days from now. So it'll be interesting to see if that moves the stock. And then finally, TSM, we'll look at them also, just technically still looking really, really good. When I have these green box on these technical charts, it does signal a buy, but just understand if you're sitting at work, you probably need the order placed, because these green boxes, I put them on here. It's not a guess. Every technical trader in the world, I'm going to say every technical trader, but a lot of technical traders, a lot of computer system, a lot of algorithmic trading is looking, we're all looking at the exact same chart. What I do on these charts is nothing proprietary. It's nothing special. In fact, I just copy what I think that the algos and the professionals at Goldman Sachs and these companies are doing, and then I just show it to you. And my green box with TSM started at 139, so it's not surprising at all that this thing is wicked into 139 and then bounced like a basketball. But you still got a beautiful long-term trend on this one, going back, I mean, really forever on this one, but it's really been firm since the great financial crisis. And, it's not the best price that we've ever seen with TSM, but you should have a lot of support for the shares in this 100 to 140 region, again, supporting the fact that the business seems to be really, really good. You are having to spend a lot of CapEx bringing back different types of manufacturing to the United States, but you got great customers like Nvidia that are willing to do that as well. Folks, that was the Semiconductor Show for, Monday, April 14th. Who knows? We might have to be back tomorrow because the news seems to change as it relates to President Trump. He says he doesn't change his mind, but he is flexible, and he's certainly not scared to share that with you on basically a minute-by-minute basis. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed today's video. We'll be back for earnings. A lot of these earnings, just to make a note, most of these earnings will actually be exclusive to Equity Empire subscribers. So I will not be posting these for free on YouTube. And if you saw my ad rates on YouTube for what I get for posting these videos, you certainly wouldn't blame me. So I appreciate everybody supporting us at Equity Empire. And if you want to see the earnings videos and get regular coverage, you're going to want to go over there. Appreciate everybody that has subscribed. And if you subscribed and you haven't gotten an email from me, just know there was way more people that signed up than I thought. And so it's taking, I'm setting aside 2 hours at night to just send everybody an email, thanking them and letting you know you can reach out if you have any problems. And there we go. Hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. See you again soon. Good luck with your investments.